Welcome to this explainer. Right now, the entire tech world is absolutely obsessed with chips, algorithms, and software, but we're kind of missing the real story here. The future of artificial intelligence isn't just about code, it's bound by physical reality. Today, we're going to dive into the massive brick wall that the AI boom is about to hit. Let's kick things off with a massive number, $650 billion. That is the projected 2026 capital expenditure from just 4 tech hyperscalers: Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, and Microsoft. And roughly 3/4 of that mountain of capital is earmarked directly for AI infrastructure. It's a completely unprecedented deployment of wealth. Honestly, it's almost impossible to even wrap your head around that kind of scale. But this leads us to a glaring, cold reality. We can spend billions and billions on GPUs, sure, but where do we actually plug them in? It's a serious mystery right now. Trillions in planned AI and cloud expenditures are being underwritten on this massive assumption that we have the grid upgrades, the cheap power, and the local zoning to support them. Well, the harsh reality is, we don't. The physical infrastructure simply does not exist to support this abstract digital spending spree.
Section 1. The physical AI bottleneck.
The absolute core of this entire crisis is a massive timescale mismatch. Look, the AI industry moves at breakneck speed. From design all the way to revenue, an AI deployment cycle takes about 12 to 18 months. But the physical world? It moves so much slower. The power grid hardware cycle, I'm talking getting the transformers, the substations, the high voltage cables, that process now spans anywhere from 3 to 7 years. This schedule mismatch makes the on-time delivery of power the single most dominant risk for AI infrastructure today. It's no longer just about whether you can get the chips, it's about whether you can actually turn them on.
Let's break down this hardware deficit, because the details are staggering. We are currently facing a 30% national shortfall for large power transformers this year. Lead times for the heaviest units have stretched out to a painful 5 years. And to try and plug this gap, the U.S. has dangerously deepened its reliance on foreign manufacturing. Just to put a number on it, U.S. imports of high-power transformers from China shot up from under 1,500 units in 2022 to over 8,000 recently. This introduces massive geopolitical fragility, exposing the entire Western AI power layer to tariff shocks, retaliatory duties, and export controls. And of course, the smaller and mid-sized providers are the ones getting hit with the absolute worst delays.
Take the Texas Power Grid, ERCOT, for example. They are currently tracking over 400 gigawatts of large load interconnection requests. To put that into perspective, many of these are gigawatt-scale sites. We're talking the size of an entire nuclear power plant, just for one site. And a staggering 87% of that massive volume is just data centers eating up the grid queue.
And obviously, this isn't just a Texas problem. Goldman Sachs is projecting that U.S. data center power demand will surge from 31 gigawatts in 2025 all the way to 66 gigawatts by 2027. But here is the critical takeaway you really need to understand. Because of this gridlock and the hardware shortages we just talked about, 30% to 50% of these builds are at risk of being delayed way beyond their original timelines, or just canceled entirely. That is an enormous failure rate for an industry with this much funding behind it. Moving on to Section 2, the financial disconnect. So what actually happens when multi-billion-dollar financial projections smack right into a 5-year waitlist for a power transformer? Well, data center financing is definitely booming, with deals hitting roughly $125 billion early this year. But credit markets are smart. They're already pricing in massive systemic risk. In fact, some A-rated investment-grade structured deals are effectively trading at yields of 8 to 12%. That is literally junk bond territory. That yield premium is investors demanding extra compensation because they're terrified of the risk of power delays and the technology becoming obsolete before it even gets plugged in. Which naturally makes you wonder, are we repeating 2008? Are we just building a digital house of cards here? Because we are seeing a really heavy reliance on structured finance. Things like ABS, CMBS, bespoke project loans, and they're all underwriting a massive, capital-intensive boom centered entirely on a single macro narrative.
Well, let's look at the facts impartially and compare this to the mortgage crisis to see where we really stand. Yes, for sure, there are similarities. We've got heavy structured finance relying on models that just assume uninterrupted growth, and everything is concentrated in one big theme. But the differences are absolutely key here. Today's deals rely on massive investment-grade counterparties, like the giant tech companies, not millions of subprime home borrowers. There's way higher transparency today, and the overall systemic leverage is still relatively small compared to the broader global credit system. So no, it's not an exact copy-paste of 2008. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a unique vulnerability. A simple delay in a physical power connection could force mark-to-market losses that could ripple through tech stocks and everyday pension funds.
To ground this in reality, let's look at how this plays out in the real world, because this isn't just theoretical finance. Take Oracle and OpenAI's flagship Stargate project down in Texas. This was originally planned to be a monstrous 2-gigawatt site, but due to stalled financing negotiations and real infrastructure limits, they had to scale it back. Look, when the biggest, most well-funded players on the planet are hitting a brick wall, you know the bottleneck is very real.
Okay, Section 3, Power, Water, and Backlash.
This financial strain isn't just a Wall Street problem. It's landing right on the doorsteps of everyday utilities and citizens, and it's sparking some severe socio-political pushback. Over the last 5 years, wholesale electricity prices near major AI and data center hubs have skyrocketed by up to 267%. Now, big tech often negotiates discounted long-term power rates for themselves, but the immense cost of actually upgrading the grid, building the new lines, the capacity charges, that frequently gets socialized. That means local, retail, residential, and small business customers end up seeing their bills climb by 20 to 30% or more, essentially subsidizing AI's massive power needs. You know the pitch. When a data center comes to town, the proponents promise thousands of jobs, lower utility rates, and massive tax revenues for the community. But the broken economic reality tells a completely different story. Once construction is finished, these highly automated facilities might employ under 100 people total. Retail power rates jump up, just like we saw. And because of aggressive tax abatements used to lure these companies in, the local municipality rarely sees the financial windfall they were promised, all while their local infrastructure is stretched to the breaking point.
And we can't ignore the environmental toll. It's not just the power grid. It's environmental exhaustion. A typical 100-megawatt AI data center can guzzle roughly 2 million liters of water every single day. That's the equivalent to the daily usage of about 6,500 homes. On top of that, the advanced cooling and fire suppression systems inside these centers often use fluorinated chemicals and PFAS, those so-called forever chemicals that run the risk of degrading right into the local groundwater. This creates a really serious, almost impossible double bind for local communities. They're being forced to trade off digital growth against their own local water security.
So, as you might expect, we are seeing a serious, escalating timeline of civil resistance. Between 2024 and 2025, over 100 local municipalities adopted temporary zoning freezes just to step back and rethink all of this. By early 2026, lawmakers in Maine pushed through the first state-level moratorium bill. And now, we're seeing federal lawmakers introduce legislation seeking national data center pauses. Now, whether these federal bills actually pass or not, this regulatory pushback has become a massive new project risk factor. Treating it impartially, the social license to operate these facilities is rapidly expiring. All right, Section 4. Can technology save us?
Look, I know this paints a pretty grim picture, but can innovation act as a pressure release valve for this escalating crisis? Well, one big beacon of hope is unified memory architecture. Think about Apple's M-series chips as a great example. By allowing the CPU and the GPU to share a single high-bandwidth memory pool, it completely eliminates the energy-draining process of constantly transferring data back and forth between discrete pools. Pushing AI tasks, specifically inference tasks like running a copilot, out to local edge devices can reduce energy consumption for those specific tasks by roughly 13.5%. It's a fantastic relief valve for the grid. It means that you querying a chatbot for a soup recipe doesn't require firing up a literal power plant hundreds of miles away. And what about keeping these things cool? You've probably heard the hype about dropping data centers to the bottom of the ocean. Well, hold off on the scuba gear. Subsea data centers are super niche and very expensive. In fact, Microsoft entirely shelved its famous underwater Project Natick. The real, immediate efficiency gains are found in terrestrial liquid cooling. It is scalable today, it cuts total data center power consumption by about 10%, and it allows for much higher, hotter rack densities without having to change where the data centers are actually built on land. So if operators want to survive this gridlock in the 2025-2026 window, the pragmatic playbook looks like this. Step 1, widespread retrofits to terrestrial liquid cooling. Step 2, adopting much smarter workload placement on the grid to balance the load. And Step 3, pushing as much latency-sensitive inference as possible right out to edge devices. This is the realistic relief valve they have to rely on.
Let's bring all these falling dominoes together to synthesize what we've learned today. We're looking at profound systemic vulnerabilities. We have a crazy timescale mismatch between fast finance and slow physics. Our reliance on foreign power hardware exposes us to massive geopolitical shocks. The credit markets are highly concentrated and essentially assuming a perfect scenario of uninterrupted growth. And finally, local policy backlash and environmental water limits have become the absolute, unyielding new regulators of the AI space.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound question to wrap things up. Will the future of AI really be capped by how many GPUs we can print, or will it ultimately be capped by copper, community zoning, and water? The physical realities of our world are knocking loudly on the digital door. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. Keep learning, stay curious, and I'll catch you next time.